Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman is a landmark work that bridges the worlds of psychiatry, history, and human rights. Through a powerful and structured narrative, Herman maps the terrain of psychological trauma, from its roots in individual experiences of violence to its collective echoes in political and social contexts. What makes this book remarkable is not only its intellectual rigor but also its deep moral clarity. Trauma, Herman argues, is not just a psychological condition, it's a condition that is shaped, silenced, and remembered by the world around us. The book opens by establishing a foundational idea: trauma shatters the sense of connection between the individual and the world. It isolates, disorients, and breaks time into a before and an after. Herman introduces the reader to the inner chaos trauma causes, but she also insists that trauma is not a personal failure or pathology, it is a normal response to abnormal situations. Whether the trauma is rooted in domestic abuse or political terror, its psychological impact follows predictable, identifiable patterns. Herman draws historical parallels between trauma in war veterans and in victims of domestic and sexual violence. She argues that while trauma has always been part of human experience, society's willingness to acknowledge it has come in waves. The book explores how public attention to trauma rises during times of political upheaval, such as the return of soldiers after World War I and II or the feminist movement of the 1970s, and then often recedes again into denial. This collective amnesia, Herman suggests, mirrors the dissociation experienced by trauma survivors themselves. In this way, trauma and recovery functions on both an individual and a societal level. On the individual level, the book walks the reader through the psychological structure of trauma. Herman explains how traumatic memories are stored differently than ordinary memories. They are fragmented, sensory, and timeless. Survivors may not recall what happened in a coherent narrative; instead, they are often haunted by vivid flashbacks or emotional states that arise without warning. She identifies 3 stages in the recovery process: establishing safety, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection with ordinary life. These stages are not rigid or linear, but they provide a framework that helps survivors and clinicians understand the path ahead. Safety, Herman insists, is the first and most essential requirement. Without a sense of physical and emotional security, no healing is possible. Therapy must begin not with the trauma story, but with grounding the survivor in a present that feels controllable and safe. In the second stage, remembrance and mourning, the survivor is invited to construct a narrative of their trauma, not simply to relive it, but to integrate it. This process is often painful and slow, requiring a balance between emotional expression and containment. Herman emphasizes that bearing witness is central to this phase. The therapist must listen with empathy, validating the survivor's pain without rushing to interpret, fix, or explain it away. The final stage of recovery involves reconnecting with community, with self, and with life. Trauma creates a rupture in meaning; healing involves building meaning again. This includes restoring the capacity for trust, pleasure, creativity, and action. Importantly, Herman notes that full recovery does not mean forgetting what happened; it means no longer being defined or dominated by it. Survivors reclaim authorship over their lives. Herman's book is deeply feminist in its framework. She highlights how much of psychological trauma, especially in the form of sexual and domestic abuse, has been historically dismissed or minimized, particularly when the victims are women. She links this silence to power: trauma that challenges dominant structures is more likely to be ignored. In this sense, the book is not just about trauma recovery but about truth recovery, about reclaiming silenced stories. Her language is precise but not clinical. She avoids jargon without dumbing down the complexity of trauma. Case studies are woven throughout the book to illustrate key ideas, but they are never voyeuristic. Each story is treated with dignity, showing the full humanity of survivors. These narratives are balanced with references to literature, history, and social theory, making the book a rich interdisciplinary tapestry. What stands out is Herman's emphasis on relationship as the site of both injury and healing. Since trauma often occurs in the context of betrayal or interpersonal violence, recovery must happen in the context of safe, trusting relationships. The therapeutic alliance becomes a corrective emotional experience, a place where control is shared, boundaries are respected, and voice is restored. She also critiques the medical model that isolates trauma as an individual issue. By situating trauma within broader social systems, war, patriarchy, racism, Herman challenges the idea that healing is a purely personal journey. Her call is not only for individual therapy, but also for social justice. She asserts that recovery cannot happen in isolation from political change, and that telling the truth about trauma is a revolutionary act. One of the most striking sections of the book discusses the role of memory and testimony. Herman makes clear that memory is not static or binary, it is shaped by context, relationship, and meaning. Survivors don't simply remember what happened, they relive and reinterpret it over time. She explores how both remembering and forgetting can serve protective functions, and how forcing a survivor to recall too much, too soon can re-traumatize them. The book ends on a quiet, powerful note of hope. While trauma can fracture identity and isolate the self, recovery is possible. Herman doesn't offer quick fixes or easy answers, instead, she offers something more honest, a roadmap based on decades of clinical work and deep ethical reflection. The survivor's journey is long and difficult, but not without meaning. Healing, she writes, is the restoration of connection, first to the self, then to others, and finally, to a shared world of truth and dignity. Ultimately, Trauma and Recovery is not just a book about psychological healing. It is a call to conscience, a plea to listen to survivors, to understand trauma in its full complexity, and to build a culture where violence is neither normalized nor denied. By combining scientific insight with human empathy, Judith Herman created a work that continues to influence trauma theory, feminist psychology, and clinical practice decades after its publication.